Welcome to the fourth episode of the Teaching with Purpose podcast. We have a very special guest in the building. We have Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings coming all the way from Madison, Wisconsin. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So why don't you first start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, for those of you who don't know, I was originally from Philadelphia. I was born and raised there, went to public schools there. I went off to college at Morgan State in Baltimore, but I was hired by the school district of Philadelphia, so I came back and taught in the district that I actually went to. I went to graduate school at the University of Washington in Seattle for 15 months and did a master's degree. I went back to Philly and then moved to California where I pursued a PhD at Stanford University. So I've been back and forth, East Coast, West Coast, and now
Shout
I'm
out
in the
to
Midwest.
What part of Philly?
West Philly.
Okay. Where'd you teach? In West Philly as well?
No, I wish I had, but I taught actually in South Philadelphia, in North Philadelphia, and in Germantown.
Nice. So what is the most accomplished thing throughout your long career? How long have you been in education?
So if you add up everything from beginning as a public school teacher to today, this is my 49th year.
49th year, wow.
If you just do the higher ed academic stuff, 26 years at the University of Wisconsin, 6 years at Santa Clara University in California, so 32 years in the academy.
Wow. So throughout that 49-year career, what would you say is the most accomplished thing that you have accomplished?
Well, it's going to sound a little hokey, but the truth of the matter is I see my legacy as my students. And so I've been able to help to mold some of the most talented young people who themselves are now in the field, in the academy, as well as just the sort of everyday young people I had as eighth graders. I got a Facebook message one time from a young man, and he was dressed in his army fatigues, and he was in Afghanistan. And he said, "Are you the Miss Billings who used to teach at Pennypack School in Germantown?" And I thought, well, yeah. And then he reminded me that he had been one of my students, and now he was a master sergeant in the Army. So to me, that's the most accomplished. I think if you look at, in terms of the research perspective, I think the work that I've been able to do with culturally relevant pedagogy is what most people would look at.
Speaking of that term, culturally relevant pedagogy, how would you, this is going to be a tough question. This is just popping in my spirit right now. How would you define that term that you coined, culturally relevant pedagogy? How would you define that term? 49. Well, how many years ago I would say you created that term?
We're talking maybe about 30 years ago.
So 30 years ago, how would you define it then, and then how would you define it currently now? Is there any difference? Is there any? And then explain the parallels.
There's some differences in expression, but I don't think there's differences in the fundamental propositions. I refer to it as a method of teaching that would ensure that kids become more empowered, that it was a pedagogy of opposition, if you will, to move against the status quo. But it was built on three primary propositions, the first being academic achievement or student learning. The idea that kids are supposed to learn something as a result of their experiences with adults in schools. The second proposition is the cultivation of cultural competence. And by that, what I'm talking about is that the kids already come with culture. We don't want their culture denigrated, but we want them to acquire fluency in at least one more culture. They should leave school, at minimum, bilingual. In an ideal world, they'd be multiculturally competent. And then the third proposition after student learning, cultural competence, is really what I would call the cultivation or development of socio-political consciousness or critical consciousness.
And that's extremely important right now.
That's the one that most people do not do. Everybody gets the first one that kids are supposed to learn.
Right.
And they can show you whether it's test scores or portfolio documentations or exhibitions that can show you where kids have learned.
Right.
Some people will go a little further and really show you how they're infusing culture and helping to develop kids grounding in their own culture and being able to acquire additional culture. But that third piece, which means engagement with the larger society, I call it, from the kids' perspective, I call it the so what factor. In other words, we teach kids things and they say to us, so what? Why do I have to know this? And if we can't answer that question, and we typically have very weak responses for it, we say something like, oh, you're going to need this next year. Well, it doesn't take kids long to figure out, you're lying.
Right.
I'm never going to need this, right? I have this wonderful T-shirt I keep threatening to buy that says, another day without having to use the Pythagorean theorem. Now, I'm not hating on mathematicians. I think math is an incredible discipline. But what I'm suggesting is that we teach this in isolation, and kids don't know, well, what does it go with? What is it connected to? So those three things are really the essence of culturally relevant pedagogy.
So that term alone, coaching relevant pedagogy, has gained a lot of notoriety. In my experience, in this field, especially I would say this year in this political arena that I've been in, I've been noticing that term being co-opted a lot. And when I say co-opted, I mean the status quo can now say, well, we're being culturally relevant because we have a Martin Luther King poster on the wall, or we're being culturally relevant because we're doing this. But I'm glad you mentioned that we often leave out the political consciousness aspect of it, because I think that's an extremely important component, and also the empowerment component as well, is because I think we have a misconception of what empowerment really is, and we're going to delve more into that later. But speaking of the term and the term being co-opted, how did you first of all, let's go back. How did you actually develop that term? What came about you with the thought of you actually coining that term?
Well, it goes back to mid-'80s with me looking through the anthropology literature. Part of my training at Stanford was in anthropology. And there are a lot of terms. There's culturally congruent, there's culturally responsive, there's culturally mitigating. And as I looked at what each of these was speaking to, I realized that's not what I'm talking about. Most of them are talking about how do you make the school more like the home. And typically, these were terms used in what I would think of as small, somewhat encapsulated communities. So, for example, Kathy Au and Kathy Jordan in the Kamehameha School in Hawaii. So they're working in a school focused on Native Hawaiians. Or Fred Erickson and Jerome Mohat doing work at Red Rock on a Native American reservation. No one had thought to use it in a large, complex, urban setting.
Okay.
So that's the first difference, that most uses of the term have been in very small, encapsulated communities where there's everybody's, quote, a member of, or whatever that community is. When you go into the complexity of urban classrooms, where it's rare that you just have all one group of kids, you might have a majority of kids, you're adding more than one culture, first off. And then secondly, most of that work is, as I said, is looking at how do you make the school more like home?
Okay.
And I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at how do you benefit from the home so that school can change. So most of the culturally responsive things were directed at curriculum. And one of the things I learned in the midst of the research is that the curriculum could be the best curriculum money can buy. If you don't have a teacher who knows what to do with it, then you just wasted money. Yet I've also seen instances where the curriculum was really bad. In other words, the school didn't have money to buy the most updated stuff. There was very old, outdated stuff that maybe had stereotypes in it. But you have a fabulous teacher who will take that and raise really important questions. So, for example, one of my teachers had an old, outdated social studies book. It was world history, and it had a line in it that said that the peoples of Nigeria are primitive and hold on to traditional cultures and beliefs. So here's a room full of mostly black kids reading this, and she stops and says, "Well, do you think that's true?" And the kids, "Well, it's in the book, and if you put it on the test, that's going to be the answer."
Right.
And she stops and she shows some slides of Tokyo, of Singapore, of London. And then she shows a slide of Nigeria, Lagos, which is one of the most bustling capitals in the world. And she asked the kids, "What do you think this is?" So then they're guessing. "Oh, that's New York. No, oh, that's Chicago. Oh, that's Paris." She says, "No, this is Lagos, Nigeria." She said, "Now let's go back to the sentence in the book." So now the kids have a conflict,
Right.
because the book says that the people are primitive and holding on to traditional culture,
Yeah.
and yet they're looking at a picture with skyscrapers and crowded streets and a very modern scene. So now the kids are like, "Oh, are you saying the book is lying?" So she said, "Well, what do you think?" I mean, like
Right.
that.
Right.
So
That's that political consciousness.
but it's her ability as a
Yeah.
teacher.
Right.
It's not the curriculum. And so that's really what kind of has driven me as I've done this work, is if I can find skilled pedagogues, if I can find teachers who know how to deal with distortions and errors and omissions, I don't have to worry as much about the curriculum, because these people know what to do with the curriculum.
So to me, I mean, that was the pure intentions, right, of that teacher. What I find is that a lot of teachers don't have that type of intentions. And I talked about this in the first episode of my podcast. We talked about the power of intentions with Principal Confele. So how can we get to a point where we can activate the intentions of political consciousness in teachers? Do you think it starts from the School of Ed programs of really exposing and educating our future teachers to this type of content? Or where do we start in terms of really activating the intentions?
So let me back up a little bit and say it's not merely their intentions. They have to have knowledge. You can have the best intention at heart if you don't know something, right? So you can have an intention, a teacher who, in that same circumstance that I described, would just say, "Well, that's not true. Nigeria is not primitive." But because that teacher doesn't have knowledge of how to show this to kids, they'd be in a worse. They wouldn't be able to do it in the same way. So I think the knowledge and the intentions are important here. But where do we get them from? One of the things that I found in common among the 8 teachers that I studied for over 3 years, and it was hard to find commonalities other than they were all women, and I think they were all women because I was in an elementary school. I don't think it's just a function of gender. But I had teachers who had taught as few as 12 years and as many as 40. So it wasn't time in the classroom, although 12 years is a good stretch. So they all were experienced. But some of them went to private schools, some of them went to state schools, some of them went to historically black colleges. So that they didn't have that in common. But what they did have in common was what I call a transformative experience. When I interviewed these teachers, there is some point in which things change for them. So with my 40-year veteran who happened to be white, who started out in a one-room rural school in Michigan, her transformative experience happened when she went to Liberia as a Peace Corps volunteer. Wow. She's like, "I don't know. I feel like my life was so sheltered. I had no idea." For other teachers, one woman, she was involved in the Black Panther Party. She married a man who was education minister. So that was, an experience. Another teacher's experience was growing up in rural Mississippi and seeing the only way you could get out from under this really oppressive segregation was that you had to have an education. And the people who impressed her most were these teachers. So I can go point to, in their interview transcripts, what the moment of transformation is. So here's the question. How do we get 19-year-olds to have a transformative experience? I think that's difficult. It may happen for people of different backgrounds because, you know, as young people of color, you're often having a transformative experience. You know, for me, I was 7 years old when I had mine. What was it? The death of Emmett Till. It changed everything. Wow. It changed everything because Emmett Till was 14 years old. He was the same age as my only brother. And all I could think of is, what on earth could my brother do to make someone do that to him? It became the lens and the filter through which I experienced everything. I would get physically ill when my family talked about going down south. Wow. So to the point where they didn't take me anymore. Wow. Because I would have an asthma attack. But the thought of that. Yeah. So I can't make that happen for a young, white, monolingual Christian woman from Oregon. I can't make that happen. How do we have the transformation? That's the part I haven't figured out. So it places me in a place where the late Martin Haberman is, and he says, those are not the people we should be searching out to be teachers. In other words, go look for the people who have had transformation and recruit them. Right now we have a kind of open door. Anybody who chooses to be a teacher should be a teacher. So one of the things I've been arguing for in Wisconsin is the creation of an urban teacher education license. Yes. Because everybody that we're prepared is not prepared to go into Milwaukee. They're not even prepared to go into Madison, given its demographic shifts.
Right. I love that idea, by the way. So the thing that's in the air, so we need to figure out how to bring about the transformations. Wow. Any ideas besides the creating this urban license?
But I think in other professions you select for what you want. Why aren't we selecting for what we want in teaching? You know, the medical profession doesn't just take everybody. Right. It selects for certain people. Engineers, they don't take just everybody. Now, they may be using metrics that we don't necessarily like. How did you do on the MCAT? Or, you know, what are your math scores? But given what the task is, I think they feel like that's a good measure for them. Right. Our task is different. So I think that we need to be able to select for people who have a commitment to service, because it is a helping profession.
When you say we, what do you, families, students?
Teacher education. I mean, if you're going to come into a teacher education program, they've got to make a decision about who they should take.
And I think that same process should be for community schools. Okay. Parents and students should be able to choose, the teacher and the principal that's going to educate them. Right. So I think that same process should be in that. Speaking of that, have you seen throughout your experience, have you seen any excellent models from a district level in terms of creating policy to support culturally relevant teaching or pedagogy?
Yeah, I think district level is hard to see because, as sociologist John Myers has said, schools are loosely coupled organizations. So you have a policy at the top. Yes. Then it has to go through middle management. Then it has to go through the local school. And then it has to get down to the classroom. But there is not tight control at each level unless you get to something so stripped down like a scripted curriculum. And that's not what we want to see. So you can have in place a really good policy, but unless you have a way to have everybody accountable up and down the line, policy implementation is a bear, right? So I might have said, yeah, we're going to do culturally relevant pedagogy in this district, but if I don't have a person who's going to be in the field going out to monitor that, then that's a breakdown there. Well, let's say I have the person going out there, but I don't have enough principals who really monitor it at their building level. Then there's a breakdown there. Or maybe I have a principal who says, yeah, this is what we're doing, but I can't be in every single classroom every single day, and so I have individual teachers. So that's the notion of loose coupling.
Okay.
That you can have policy,
Right.
but it's hard to trace that policy all the way through.
Though it's hard, but is it? We still have. This is the system that we have in place, and this
Right.
is the system that we
So
have to
haven't,
operate in.
your question was whether or not I'd seen it at the district level. I haven't seen it at the district level, but let me give you an example of a way in which policy has flows through a system, even without, say, a strong principal or strong superintendent. Higher education has literally determined your curriculum for you. The reason you have 4 years of English is not an accident. Higher ed says you got to have 4 years of English if you come into this school. You have to have 3 years of mathematics, and we rather you have 4. So every high school you go to who is planning to send kids to college, they religiously follow this, right? Now, it's not the superintendent.
Right.
It's the University of Oregon, or it's Oregon State, or it's the University of Washington, or it's the University of Wisconsin that is laid out through the College Board. These are the requirements to get into these, quote, quality institutions, and the schools follow suit. So, but they follow suit because there's an incentive. In other words, if you do this, you're likely to get that which you want, which is admission into the school of your choice.
Right.
What's the incentive to do a culturally relevant approach to teaching? If higher ed, for example, says, we don't really want to take people who haven't had experiences with other people. And in some places they do. So having gone to Stanford, I was just intrigued by their admissions process. They tend to have a very diverse class for such an elite school. When I talked to the admissions officer, he said, well, because it turns out we can only take about 1,700 students. We send admission to 2,200 because we know they're all not going to come here. Some of them are going to go to Harvard. Some of them are going to go to Yale. Right. But in hopes of getting 1,700, we admit 2,200. He said, but right off the bat, we get 3,500 who have perfect grades, 4.0 or better.
Wow.
Right off the bat,
3,500.
Right off the bat, we get more than 3,500 who are in the 90th percentile or better of the SAT. Wow. He said, so we can't use just scores or tests. And he said, if we use them, we're likely to get a very skewed class. We're likely to get a class full of people who want to be engineers. Or we're likely to get a class full of Californians. We look for what we think of diversity as value added. So what other things have you done? What other experiences have you had? So clearly there are ways in which, the reason why kids do service learning now. Why? Because they got to have these service learning credits either to graduate or that the school that they're attending or they'd like to attend wants to know what have been your volunteer. So that's the carrot as opposed to the stick that we've been using, which has been test scores.
Interesting. That was that's a whole nother. We can go a whole nother direction with that, and that could be a whole nother episode. Staying in lines of this whole notion and this term of culturally relevant pedagogy, oftentimes, and to the notion of it being co-opted. So let me just ask you this, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about?
I tell this to my students who are going off to be professors and knowledge producers themselves. And if you're in the knowledge production business, it turns out you have no control over what people do with it once you release it. Case in point. I was teaching a class of freshmen, and I can't remember what song it was. I want to say it might have been Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, right? Because I love the message, right? So I'm playing the song thinking the kids are going to love it. And they say to me, oh, yeah, that's the song they be playing at the surf. Now, the surf is the gym.
Yeah.
That's the song they be playing at the surf in the room where they have the fast track machine, the machines, right? And I looked at them and I said, are y'all telling me that Grandmaster Flash has become like music, like elevator music? And they're like, well, yeah, it's sort of just in the background, right?
Yeah.
In other words, they never put it out for that. They put it out. It's called The Message.
Right,
so it's
right.
put out to try to change your mind.
Right.
But now it's out there, and it's just kind of floating around in the atmosphere.
Wow.
You don't have control over it once you produce it. And that's true for anything. I'm sure you've heard of the notion of cooperative learning,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But most people don't know where it came from and what its intent was. I happen to have studied with the woman who created the notion at Stanford. And I'm sure she's like turning over in her grave with what people now use it for.
Right, right.
Because it was really used to create what she called equal status relationships. It was used as a part of the school desegregation movement.
Wow.
None of that gets talked about. It's just, it's cute to have all the kids work together in a team.
Right.
So you lose the ability
Yeah.
to hold on to it once you create it.
Right. And I don't know, it's the status quo loves using these terms. Equity is just thrown around. And they culturally relevant pedagogy. But they also uses Gloria's term, culturally responsive for teaching and pedagogy. Now, what do you think are the fundamental differences and similarities in these two terms? The reason I'm asking is because in the different literature that I'm reading, let's say like a State Department might create a document exemplifying, showing how they are using culturally relevant pedagogy or teaching. But I also noticed they might title it culturally responsive practice, but then say culturally relevant. You know what I mean? So they keep using these different terms.
Right.
But I don't really think they really have a strong knowledge base and what the pure intentions is with these particular terms. So if you can, for our audience, just break down what are the fundamental differences and similarities and the fundamental purpose of each one.
So Geneva Gay is credited with developing the term culturally responsive curriculum. Why does that make sense? Because Geneva is a curriculum theorist.
Yes.
So she's looking at the stuff of education. What are you going to put in front of students? What is it that teachers are going to use to teach from?
Yes.
I use the term culturally relevant pedagogy because I'm talking about the actual instruction, the teaching. What is it the teacher is going to do? And so I'm not sure that these documents that we see at, like you said, the State Departments really understand that there is a difference between the curriculum, that which you put in a teacher's hand, and the actual practice, the teaching.
Yes.
And typically what happens is districts or State Departments fall in love with a model of teaching.
Right.
So now everybody's doing the Danielson model.
Yep.
Decades ago, it was Madeline Hunter. I mean, one keeps coming up every time. But the work of culturally relevant pedagogy is more linked to your first comment about intention. What are the basic belief systems that teachers have about themselves and their learners? What do they basically believe about their own efficacy? Do you believe kids are actually able to be educated? Now, that sounds weird, but there are people out there that will say, oh, my kids can't, that they don't believe that kids can do certain things. If that's the starting point, then I don't care what the curriculum looks like, and I also don't care what the teaching model is.
Do you think that could be measurable, like a Danielson model?
I mean, I think we're working at it.
Intentions and belief.
I think we work at it. I would refer you to a good colleague I have at the University of Illinois who has sort of devoted his life work to this kind of stuff. He's an evaluation specialist, Stafford Hood.
Okay.
And Stafford is really trying to figure out how can we measure the degree to which teachers are actually doing a culturally relevant
Please connect
teaching.
me with him. Yes.
Because that's really been the thing for him. He's a quant guy. He's a numbers guy. He's like, how can we figure this out?
Right.
Because in his mind, this is the only way we can actually sell it. Not sell it as in make money, but to convince people
transformation.
That this is what we need to be doing.
So do you think transformation can happen systematically? Like, do we need to change the system? Does the system need to be transformed in order for, I guess, hearts and minds are the people that change the system? Do you understand what
I understand what you're saying. I also realize that we continue to use a more 19th century approach to teaching and learning. We still think the best way to do it is put 20 to 25 kids in a room with one adult. We don't realize the degree to which kids are learning from each other, the degree to which their after-school experiences are helping them learn, the degree to which the technologies that they engage are becoming a source of learning for them. Most classrooms don't engage any of this stuff. And until we move away from this 1 to 20, 1 to 25 ratio, until we move away from one adult as the knowledge bearer, we're going to keep doing the same stuff.
Yeah. So there's a key term in your culturally relevant pedagogy is empower. What does that mean to you? Because the key word is empower students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically. So what does empowerment mean to you in this current context of time that we're living in?
Yeah, it's actually one of those terms I wish I hadn't used. Not because I don't believe in it, but again, it's like what people think that I'm talking about that kind of bristles, rubs me the wrong way. Because I want people to understand we don't actually empower. Knowledge empowers. Experiences empower. And so the culturally relevant pedagogy is a teaching designed to get you in this place where you scratch your head and say, wait a minute, that's not right. Or, you know what, I know something more than what it is that you're saying. So for me, that notion of empowerment is sort of setting that spark in someone to dig down deep and reveal that which is already there. It's not putting stuff into them. For me, the best example of that kind of work happened in the 1960s with the citizenship schools, where Septima Clark went into communities to help poor communities, rural communities in the South, to try to get people. She had two purposes. One, get them ready so that they could participate as citizens in voting and fighting for change. But number two, to have them receptive enough to the ideas and the perspectives that were coming from people like Martin Luther King. Because you think back, Dr. King was a middle-class black boy. He was a preacher's kid. He grew up in the city. So, we don't have a story of Dr. King picking cotton, okay? That never happened. Right. So he was fairly privileged, and he went to college, and he went to Boston and got a doctorate. How do you have a Dr. King talk to a sharecropper, right? And that the sharecropper, it makes sense to the sharecropper. You have a Septima Clark, who is the intermediary, who says there's nothing he's saying that you can't understand, that helps that spark. So for Septima Clark, the idea was helping people put knowledge in practice. So she wouldn't give them little books that said A is for apple or B is for ball. She'd say to them, what's your heart's desire? What is it why on earth would you want to read? So someone might say, I just really want to read the Bible. I go to church every Sunday, but I want to read it for myself.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what's down deep in them. I want to learn. I want to get to that Bible. So now she's got a way to reach them because they have this purpose. Or somebody else might say, I've been trying to get on at the mill. I want to get out of these fields. I want to work at the mill. Okay, so now she's helping that person learn terms like personnel director or human resources, right? That's what's down deep, and that's where their passions lie. And so she was able to do that. Once they started doing that, a lot of those people got in the political process. So who's an example of one of her graduates? Fannie Lou Hamer. Because Fannie Lou was in the field. But once she learned to read, and read, as Paulo Freire would say, the world and the word, she wasn't content just to go vote. She needed a lot of people to go vote. She wasn't content to just go in the field. She wanted to be active in the Democratic Party from Mississippi. So here this woman is in 1968 sitting in front of the world declaring, my name is Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm from Sunflower County, Mississippi, and I'm the duly elected delegate to the Democratic National Convention. She shocked the nation. Lyndon Johnson was like, get that woman off because it was a debate over whether or not she should be there.
Right.
But you don't come from the field to the front of a TV screen that the world can see without someone like September Clark teaching you how to use the knowledge. And so that's when I talk about empower, it's the idea that you help to get that spark that's already there.
Right,
You're not giving them stuff they don't have.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Yes.
I just typed in empowerment in the dictionary. It says to give the authority or power to something or to someone.
And that's the part of it I don't like. Because I don't feel like we're giving stuff to people. I think we are helping to unearth what they already have.
When I look at that, I look at, because we still have to navigate through systems. So when I think of empowerment, empower, and what you just alluded to when you said knowledge, right? And knowledge is power. So when we give our communities knowledge of how to operate through the systems, right? To me, that is a form of empowerment. You're empowering them because now they have that knowledge base on how to navigate through the system.
Right.
Even though the system is, we all know is designed to oppress, however, we still have to navigate through it and function through it. So how do we empower ourselves? And to what I got is from you is through knowledge.
It's through knowledge, and it's also recognizing the agency of the people in our communities. A lot of times there are those of us who our hearts are in the right place, but we want to act for people and then turn around and say, I'm empowering them. No, not really. They'll be empowered if they recognize their own agency, their ability to say, this is exactly what I want, this thing right here. I don't know what it is you're going after, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so, but this is what I want. And it's their agency that I think is missing in most of the conversation. So even if the state takes up this notion of, we're going to do culturally responsive or culturally relevant, it's lacking the agency of the people.
And when expound on that when you say the agency of the people.
So why do most middle class people like their schools? Because they are agents in those schools. They can make things happen. I didn't realize this until I went to a school board meeting. My kids, my older kids went to school in California, and I went to a school board meeting in Palo Alto. If you don't know, Palo Alto is one of the wealthiest communities in America. There's probably not one house in Palo Alto today worth less than $1 million. Wow. And we're at this meeting, and the parents are upset about something. And so the superintendent and the board chairman is explaining why they can't have what it is they want. And I'll never forget, this man stood up and he said, you don't get it. You just sit there because we allow you to sit there.
Wow.
We're in charge. And if we can't get what we want from you, you will be gone the next time. And we will have someone there who can give us what we want. And I mean, my mouth flew open. I had been teaching for almost 20 years at that time. And I thought, oh my God. But it was a sense of agency that this person had, that you can't stop me from organizing. You can't stop me from rallying parents. And I know that the reason you sit on the board is because we voted for you. And we don't have to keep you there. That's the piece that I think is often missing from our communities, that they do not they don't take advantage of the agency. They think, well, somebody else will do this or someone will speak for us. And I think that speaks for me to true empowerment, the sense that, oh no, I'm an agent. I can do certain things.
And to me, that ties into the next, I think, key component, social justice. How would you define that, and why is that a key element in CRT?
So, I think, again, social justice has become kind of a buzzword.
Exactly. Like
everybody's using
equity
it.
And now coaching relevant pedagogy, coaching
and I know
responsive
people
pedagogy.
often trolling the websites of teacher ed programs to see if they use the term because they think of it as something soft and mushy and, quote, politically correct.
But why just attack a term that is attending to bring about
because
social
I think people see it as exclusive to the marginalized, right? That, oh, this is what they want. And I've actually drifted away from social justice to just the term justice. Because when you tell me you're not for justice, you done told me a whole lot. You done told me a whole lot. Because the entire society is supposed to be built on justice.
But it's the same thing as equity, right?
No, the system is built on equality.
Okay.
And there's a difference between equality and equity.
Yes.
Right?
But it's a buzzword, though. A lot of
it's
here
become that.
In Oregon, a lot of people use it.
It's become that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm trying to get people to look carefully at how we're using these terms. What do they mean? And what do they look like in a kind of material reality? What does that mean, for example, for your advanced placement offerings? What is equity in advanced placement?
Right.
Now, some people would not even put the two together.
Yeah.
I suggest to parents all the time, if you're paying your taxes, you have a right to anything that the school offers except those things that are federally categorical.
Even tag?
Yes. Yes, because that's not a categorical program. Categorical programs are for kids with diagnosed disabilities. Okay, I get that I can't be in that.
So every kid can be in tag?
Yes. And what I say to parents all the time is that your child should take at least one advanced placement class. And I don't care what the recommendation is.
Right.
You're paying for that teacher to be there.
Right.
And the fact that you're paying that person's salary and you're paying for services in that school, you should be able to take advantage of those services. And you shouldn't be discouraged because someone says, oh, well, they're only going to get a C. So what? If it's really a great class, I'd rather them get a C in the advanced placement European history class than an A in, checkbook mathematics or whatever course you've made up for them.
Wow. So you are an official triple OG in this educational fight, in this educational arena. You have seen a lot throughout your career. As we close out this segment, can you just give us, first of all, I just want to say I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Your contribution to this fight has been tremendous, and it's inspired me. And it keeps my engine going. And I just really deeply appreciate you. So I'm a type of person. I'm a action oriented person. I don't like talking. You know, if I'm the type of person, if you talking mess, I'm just gonna pull up on you and we're just gonna have a conversation. I don't like all the talking and all that stuff. I don't do all that. Let's just get straight to the point. Okay, what can we do? What type of action can we make to make some type of change? You've seen a lot, and I feel that we haven't really moved the dial a lot in terms of, I would say, since Brown versus the Board of Education. Where do we go from here? I mean, where do we go currently in 2017? We still have a lot of different things that's plaguing our educational system. Where do we go from here, and how do we continue to fight and actually see some real change?
So I want to challenge you a little bit on that we haven't made any progress, or we haven't moved the dial, because we have. You're talking to someone whose father had a third-grade education, who could only go to school a couple months a year because he was a sharecropper's son. You're talking to someone who has grandparents who didn't go to school at all, who were sharecroppers. You're talking to someone who has great-grandparents who just came out of chattel slavery. Oh, the dial's been moved.
Right.
Has it been moved enough? No. High school graduation rates are higher than they've ever been. Is that enough? No, because too many of our kids are getting their high school graduation not by walking across a stage, but by completing the GED. So it's not as if we haven't made any progress. But I just always want to remind people that we're not in this to win. And I think that's a very sort of American mindset. You got to win. We're not called to success. We're called literally to struggle. To struggle. That's our tradition. And why would we be called to struggle? Because one develops strength in the midst of struggle.
Wow.
You know, if you look at the ancient, is it Sisyphus, where he's pushing that boulder up a hill. And you know what's going to happen to him. And if he gets to the top of the hill, it's going to roll back down. But the point is not getting the boulder up the hill. If you look at anyone's rendering of Sisyphus, whether it is a drawing or a piece of sculpture, you will notice that Sisyphus has these amazing thighs, quad muscles, and biceps, and triceps, and calf muscles, because he's gotten stronger pushing that rock. So our job is to push the rock. It's to push the rock. And I think what, for me, is the frustrating part is we have a generation that don't want to push the rock. They just think it should be. And I'm like, no, you literally have to push the rock. You got to get out there.
I admit, I think
you got to fight. You know, you got to fight.
Cause I'm just like, it's been too long. I'm like, we seeing the same stuff, and I'm just like, what the heck is going on?
But we're also seeing, but
you're
also seeing new permutations. So what once was slavery became sharecropping.
Right.
What was sharecropping has now become incarceration. I mean, Michelle Alexander hits the nail on the head when she said, this is the new Jim Crow. Right? We have a system that hasn't figured out post-slavery, what do we do with these black people? That's like the problem of the system. We don't know what to do with y'all. The American Indians, we just put them over here somewhere, right? And allowed them to kill themselves with alcohol and tobacco and have them malnourished. We don't deal with them. It'll be interesting as things like agribusiness either goes overseas or goes to more robotics, what they decide to do with Latinos. So when you become expendable to a system, then you become an irritant. Right now, we make money for the system because we go into prison. They make money off of us being in prison. It's slave labor in terms of the work you do. Nobody makes more than $1 a day in prison, even when they're working. So once we understand that the society really hasn't figured out what to do with us, and that we decide, okay, this is what we want to do with us, Even when I hear people criticize internally, like, well, black people need to do X and they need to do Y, I know that's somebody who hasn't read their history. We need our own businesses. We had them.
Right.
We had a Black Wall Street.
Yeah.
We didn't have to go anywhere for anything because all of our services were there. What happened? They bombed it.
Right.
So it's not like we haven't tried strategies. Until a society comes to grips with what I call its original sin, which is racism. And racism is older than slavery. Excuse me, slavery is just the opposite. Slavery is older than racism. There were slaves in Europe, right? There were Hebrew slaves, if you read your Bible. There've been Greek slaves. So the idea that you put somebody in servitude is not new. But when you marry that notion with the evil of racism, in which you say you're not even a human being. See, they knew Hebrews were people. They would marry them. They could intermarry. They knew that the Greeks they were enslaving were people because they would have them teach their kids. But what happened here, where you marry slavery with racism, and you basically say these are not human beings, and I have no obligation to treat them as such, then you've created a system that we now have called white supremacy that you're trying to keep propped up, and it isn't working. So it's not merely that we're struggling; the society is struggling. This society will never reach its potential until it comes to grips with the myth of white supremacy. It just won't.
Wow, that was powerful. And I kind of want to leave it there because to me that's a good conclusion to some of the key elements that we were talking about in terms of the political consciousness and empowerment. And those who are tuning in, listening, I've been inspired. You activated me. You shifted me a couple times. You shifted my mind in terms of looking at the term of empowerment and looking at it as the knowledge base. I think that was key. But in terms of, I think we need to have a mission to really activate the political consciousness, especially in this time that we're living in now.
Yes.
Currently, where I think the political knowledge is starting to rise. I think people are starting to pay more attention to politics, even on a local level and state and federal level. So with that said, I just want to encourage you educators out there to really start activating political consciousness, but get the knowledge and the experience for your transformation. And I think that was another key word is that transformation. And that's the thing that we need the most is the transformation, transforming hearts and minds, paradigm shifts. So those of you who are listening, I hope you are taking notes. That's what this podcast is for you to gain knowledge, is for you to gain experience, understanding for your transformation. So with that said, I want to thank you for our fourth episode of the Teaching with Purpose podcast, and hopefully we can continue this, and thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right.